Today I'm going to cook a very simple dish. It's potatoes with some vegetables.
I'm just trying to 好住 her eye. I'm just trying to make sure I get everything in the shot.
The best part about this is the versatility and all the different attachments that you can put on it. The best part about this is the versatility and all the different attachments that you can put on it.
The morning did not arrive gently. It crashed into the small wooden house with the cry of a hungry child, the rustle of restless blankets, the thin walls trembling under the first strike of sunlight. And in the middle of it all stood Ly Tieu Ca, a mother too young to be this weary, too fragile to carry so much weight, yet carrying it all the same. Her arms ached as she lifted the baby, her voice raw but soothing as she whispered lullabies half-remembered, half-invented, every note a desperate plea for silence, for peace, for just one more moment of stillness. The baby did not listen, its wails cutting through the air like knives, each cry a reminder that survival left no room for weakness. At the same time, the older child tugged at her sleeve, demanding breakfast, demanding attention, demanding the impossible. And Ly Tieu Ca forced a smile that cracked at the edges, a smile that hid the exhaustion that had settled deep into her bones. She moved to the small stove, lit with trembling fingers, the fire reluctant, as if even flames had grown tired of her endless struggle. The smoke curled upward, whispering of poverty, whispering of dreams once bright, now smothered by ash. She cracked the last egg she had, the yolk breaking unevenly, and she laughed bitterly, whispering to herself, "Even the eggs are tired of me." The children ate quickly, their small mouths chewing greedily, and she watched them with a hunger of her own, not for food, but for the future she prayed would not betray them. Outside, the garden waited, rows of struggling vegetables bending under the weight of dew, chickens scratching in the dirt, clucking as if mocking her. She gathered eggs with care, each one fragile, each one precious, and she held them as though holding her own fragile hope. Her hands were cracked, her nails broken, but she touched the earth with reverence, whispering to the soil as if it were an old friend, "Grow, please grow. They need you more than I need rest." The wind answered with a chill, reminding her that not all prayers reached heaven. Hours passed in a blur of chores, of soothing cries, of wiping small faces, of bending over soil, and through it all she carried herself like a ghost wandering a battlefield, unseen, unthanked, but undefeated. Yet when the sun reached its cruel peak, when the children finally slept, she sat down heavily, her back pressed to the wall, her eyes closing for just a moment. In that fragile silence, doubts crept in, sharper than hunger, heavier than fatigue. She thought of school fees, of uniforms, of pencils and books her eldest would soon need. She thought of the whispers in the village, the pitying eyes, the judgments unspoken but sharp. She thought of the absence beside her at night, the silence where a husband's voice should have been, the void where love had once promised to stay. Her chest tightened, tears burned, but she swallowed them, because mothers, especially mothers alone, were not allowed the luxury of tears. She rose again, moved again, fed again, worked again, as though powered by something beyond flesh, beyond will, something ancient and indestructible. Still, as she laid the baby back into its cradle, as she stroked the older child's hair and whispered of dreams she did not believe in, the shadow of despair pressed harder, whispering, How much longer can you carry this alone? And then, in the late afternoon, when the air grew heavy and the cicadas screamed from the trees, a sound broke the monotony. The creak of a gate, the steady tread of footsteps unfamiliar yet strangely certain. Ly Tieu Ca froze, her heart hammering, the child in her arms stirring, and she turned slowly to see him. A man standing tall at the doorway, his presence filling the small space like a storm rolling in. He was not a stranger, not entirely. His face carried the memory of brief meetings, of polite words exchanged in passing. But here, now, in her home, he seemed different, larger, heavier, like a force that could shift the fragile balance of her world. His eyes were steady, his voice low. How are you managing? She tried to answer, but her throat closed, for something in his tone carried not pity, not judgment, but a weight she could not name, a weight that made her both hopeful and afraid. She set the baby down carefully, her hands trembling, her mind racing, for she knew the world did not offer help without cost. She knew men did not step into a widow's house without reason. Yet, as he stepped closer, as he looked at her children with something that resembled tenderness, as he offered a smile that was not mocking but genuine, she felt the earth shift beneath her feet. He reached into his bag, pulled out peaches fresh and golden, their scent filling the room like a forgotten summer, and he placed them on the table with care. The children stirred, their eyes widening, their hands reaching, and laughter broke the silence. Laughter she had not heard in too long. For a moment she allowed herself to breathe, to taste sweetness, to believe that perhaps fate had not abandoned her completely. But deep inside, beneath the sweetness, beneath the laughter, another voice whispered, cold and sharp, "Every gift carries a shadow, every kindness hides a price." And though she smiled, though she thanked him, though she watched her children eat with joy, her heart remained guarded, her soul trembling, for she knew that this was only the beginning, that storms often arrive carrying sunlight before the thunder strikes. The next morning did not bring peace. It arrived with a restless stirring of children, the crackle of a fire that refused to burn, and the echo of yesterday's unexpected visit still heavy in the air. Ly Tieu Ca's hands trembled as she washed the rice, her mind replaying the image of CEO Hung standing in her doorway, his eyes steady, his voice low, his presence filling her small house with both comfort and unease. She remembered the peaches he left on the table, their sweetness lingering on her children's lips, their laughter echoing long after he had gone. And for the first time in months she had seen their joy. Yet beneath that sweetness, her heart throbbed with fear, because every sweetness carries a shadow, every kindness a price. She whispered to herself while stirring the pot, "Nothing in this world comes free." And the sound of her own voice unsettled her more than silence ever had. The children clung to her legs, unaware of the storm brewing inside her chest, the baby babbling, the older one tugging at her sleeve asking if the man would come again, if he would bring more peaches, if he would bring books and pencils for school. And Ly Tieu Ca forced a smile, pressing her child close, whispering, "We will see, my dear, we will see." Though inside she feared the answer more than she feared hunger. When she stepped outside, the village eyes were already watching. Neighbors with baskets of vegetables, men squatting near the well, women bent over laundry, all with glances sharper than knives, all with whispers trailing after her like smoke. She heard fragments, words twisted into poison. The widow has found herself a benefactor. Men do not visit for nothing. She will repay him in ways she cannot speak of. And each whisper cut deeper than hunger, deeper than cold. Yet she walked straight, her back unbowed, though her heart quaked with shame. In the garden she bent to gather eggs, her hands trembling as though the shells carried the weight of their judgment. And she whispered to the earth, "I am not what they say. I am only a mother." But even the soil could not answer. Only the wind carried her words away. That afternoon, CEO Hung returned, his footsteps heavy, his shadow long, and though she wished to hide, to lock the door, she stood frozen as he entered, carrying books, notebooks, pencils, all laid gently upon the table. He looked at her child and smiled, saying, "Every child deserves to learn." His tone simple, yet carrying the weight of decisions she could not refuse. The child's eyes shone with delight, hugging the books as though they were treasure, and Ly Tieu Ca felt both joy and dread. Joy that her child would not be left behind, dread that she owed a debt she could never repay. She bowed her head, whispering thanks, but he only shook his head, his gaze unwavering. "You owe me nothing." Yet in her heart she knew nothing in life was without cost. Days turned into weeks, and his visits became more frequent. Sometimes with food, sometimes with advice, sometimes with nothing but his presence. And each time her children grew closer to him, laughter flowing freer, smiles brighter, and she too felt the edges of her fear softening. For in his eyes, she did not see judgment, only something steadier, something she dared not name. Yet still the whispers in the village grew louder, people watching, tongues wagging, words twisting, painting pictures of scandal where none existed. She bore it in silence, but at night when the children slept, when the walls creaked with the weight of her thoughts, she lay awake wondering, was this kindness real? Or was it a storm waiting to break? Was CEO Hung a savior? Or a danger wrapped in warmth? One evening he stayed longer than usual, the children asleep, the oil lamp flickering shadows across the walls, and he spoke of his own life, of the burden of leadership, of the emptiness behind wealth, of the silence in large rooms filled with no laughter. And Ly Tieu Ca listened, her heart softening. For in his words she heard not power, but loneliness, a loneliness that mirrored her own. She met his gaze then, truly met it, and for a heartbeat the world held still. Two souls staring across the chasm of class, of circumstance, of pain, and finding in the other a reflection of themselves. But just as quickly she looked away, clutching the hem of her dress, whispering, "I cannot," though she did not finish the thought, did not explain whether it was love she could not allow, trust she could not give, or simply hope she could not risk. The following days brought greater storms, for her daughter's enrollment at school drew near. Fees she could not pay loomed like thunderheads, and though CEO Hung offered quietly, firmly, she refused, pride and fear battling within her. But the truth gnawed at her heart. Without him, her child would step into the classroom with nothing. Without him, her child would already stand behind the others, and she lay awake nights, listening to the soft breathing of her children, the sound both a balm and a blade. And she whispered to herself, "What kind of mother am I if I cannot give them what they need?" It was then that the whispers turned to open accusations, women confronting her at the well, sneers curling their lips. "We see you with him. Do not pretend you are pure. You have chosen your path." And she clenched her fists until her nails dug into her palms, her voice trembling as she answered, "I have done nothing but care for my children." But they only laughed, laughter sharper than knives, and she returned home bleeding inside, the walls of her house the only witness to her tears. She held her children tighter that night, whispering promises she did not know how to keep. Promises of dignity, of safety, of a future unmarred by scandal. CEO Hung noticed her silence, noticed the weariness deeper than before, and one evening he confronted her gently, his eyes burning. "Do not listen to them. They do not know you. They do not see what I see." And she wanted to believe him, wanted to trust, but fear still coiled around her heart, whispering of betrayal, of disappointment, of debts she could never repay. She turned away, whispering, "They see enough to condemn me, and I cannot fight them." He stepped closer, his voice sharper now. "Then let me fight for you." And the words struck her like a storm, both terrifying and comforting, for she had never had anyone fight for her, never had anyone stand beside her against the world. As the days marched toward the school's opening, the pressure grew unbearable, her pride breaking, her fear consuming. And one night as rain battered the roof, as thunder roared like judgment, she wept silently beside her sleeping children, whispering to the darkness, "Perhaps I must accept. Perhaps I cannot stand alone forever." And in that whisper lay both surrender and despair. Yet she knew, deep inside, that every surrender to kindness risked betrayal. Every open hand risked being cut. And as she closed her eyes, she wondered, when the storm truly broke, would lythihuong be her shelter? Or would he be the lightning that burned all she had left? And so, part 2 closed not with resolution, but with a question. A shadow lingering at the edge of every gift, every kindness, every gaze held too long. For love and danger often wear the same face, and in the small house where a mother fought to keep her children safe, the line between salvation and destruction had never been thinner. The days that followed were not kind. Whispers hardened into venom. Neighbors no longer hid behind half smiles, but spat their words openly. At the well, at the market, in the dusty roads where children played. And every step Ly Tieu Ca took was shadowed by their judgment. They said she had sold herself. They said she had trapped lythihuong. They said her children would grow up cursed. And though she tried to hold her head high, each word was a stone laid upon her chest. Each glance another lash across her back. She walked forward, but her soul staggered, her pride bleeding unseen. Her daughter Han began to notice, asking, "Mama, why do they talk like that? Why do they laugh when they see us?" And Ly Tieu Ca forced her lips into a smile, whispering, "Because they do not know the truth. And sometimes, people fear what they do not understand." But inside her heart broke, for no child should learn cruelty so soon. lythihuong knew, he heard, he saw, and anger coiled within him. Not the quiet anger of insult, but the burning rage of injustice. He confronted men at the market, his voice a thunder that silenced their jeers. He stood at her gate each evening as a shield, his figure daring anyone to cast stones again. And for a while, the village retreated into sullen silence. But silence is only the breath before another storm. The storm came one night, sudden and violent. The crash of wood against her door, shouts in the darkness, faceless men hurling threats, calling her names that made her children sob, stones rattling the thin walls like gunfire. And she clutched her babies to her chest, whispering prayers, her heart slamming like a trapped bird, until the door burst open and lythihuong was there, fury in his eyes, his presence filling the room like a storm breaking against the sea. He drove them back with nothing but his voice, nothing but the weight of his will. The night finally quieted, but the silence that followed was heavy, trembling. For danger once glimpsed does not vanish. It waits, it festers. After that night he stayed close, too close, bringing guards, bringing food, bringing gifts. And though part of her felt safer, another part recoiled. Because safety that comes from one man's strength is a fragile safety, one that can vanish if he turns away, one that binds as tightly as it protects. She whispered to herself in the dark, "Am I free, or am I only shifting chains?" And the question gnawed at her until sleep would not come. Then came the accident that shattered everything. A cart overturned in the market, horses panicked, wheels spinning. And in the chaos, her daughter Han was struck, flung to the ground, her cry piercing the noise like a blade. Ly Tieu Ca ran screaming, her knees tearing against the stones as she reached her child, blood staining her small dress, her eyes rolling with pain. The world blurred. her hands shaking as she tried to lift the weight of wood and iron, screaming until her voice broke. And then CEO Hung was there, his body straining, veins bursting as he hauled the cart aside, lifting Han into his arms, running through the crowd, his breath a roar, his face carved with desperation. He carried her to the doctor's house, refusing to let her go even when his muscles gave out, even when his vision swam. Hours stretched into eternity, the doctor working by the dim light of a lamp, the air thick with the scent of herbs and blood. Ly Tieu Ca pressed against the wall, her nails digging into her palms until they bled, whispering bargains to heaven, promising her life, her soul, everything. If only her child survived. CEO Hung knelt at the bedside, his hands clasping Han's small fingers, his voice steady, though his face was white. "Hold on, little one. Hold on. You are stronger than this." And when at last the doctor said she would live, though scars would remain, both collapsed with relief. Ly Tieu Ca sobbing into her hands, CEO Hung's shoulders sagging as though the weight of the world had finally broken him. That night, when Han slept fitfully, Ly Tieu Ca looked at CEO Hung and for the first time saw him stripped of his wealth, stripped of his power, just a man with blood on his hands from saving her child, a man who had chosen her storm when he could have turned away. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Why do you do this? Why do you risk yourself for me?" And he met her gaze without hesitation. "Because I see you. I see your strength, your love, your suffering, and I cannot turn away, even if it destroys me." His words burned into her soul, tearing down the walls she had built, and for a moment she allowed herself to lean into him, to let the tears fall, not into silence, but into the warmth of another. But storms breed storms, and soon his family came, men in dark suits with cold eyes, voices sharp as knives. They told him his reputation was at stake, his company would suffer, his name would be ruined if he continued. They told him to abandon her, to abandon the widow who had brought shame to his house. And though his jaw tightened, though his eyes burned, he refused, his voice low but unyielding. "I will not turn my back, not on her, not on those children." And lytutca heard, her heart shattering, because she knew the price of defiance in his world was higher than any gossip in hers. That night she told him softly, "You must go. You must let me bear this alone. I cannot be the ruin of your life." But he shook his head, his voice fierce. "You are not my ruin. You are the only reason I stand at all." The village's hatred did not vanish, but after the accident some turned quieter. Some looked at him standing at her door and thought twice, yet others only sharpened their scorn, whispering darker threats, waiting for a chance to strike again. And so they lived in uneasy peace, nights filled with fear, days filled with fragile hope. Ly Tieu Ca worked still, gathering eggs, planting seeds, cooking meals, her hands as weary as ever. But now, when she looked at her children, she saw not only her reflection but his shadow too, a man who had chosen to fight beside her. And though she feared what tomorrow might bring, though she knew storms never truly ended, she let herself whisper a promise. If we must walk through fire again, we will not walk alone. And so the story closed, not with triumph nor with despair, but with survival, with scars worn like medals, with love that had been tested in the fire of rumor, of blood, of sacrifice, and had not broken, a love that might still burn the world around them, or might save it. No one could say. But for that night, in that small wooden house, with children sleeping safely, with CEO Hung standing guard at her door, Ly Tieu Ca allowed herself to breathe, to believe, to hope, and hope, fragile though it was enough to face whatever storm the horizon carried.